Funding is provided by a grant from New York State Senator Catherine M. Young, representing Western New York's 57th District with a local office in Olean. Funding is provided by a grant from Absolute Care of Westfield, committed to returning the favor to those who spent a lifetime caring for others. Absolute Care is located at 26 Cass Street in Westfield. Dave Cass and Rick Newell provide funding on behalf of the Lakeview Hotel and Restaurant at the Docks, located on Water Street near the lake in Mayville. From the Access Channel 5 television studio in Mayville, it's Senior Report with Reed Powers. Join us live Saturday mornings between 9 and 10 a.m. in Fredonia, Mayville, and Silver Creek. Call in and share a thought or wish someone a happy birthday with Chautauqua County's only live on-air senior program. Reed continues in his 15th year with interesting guests expressing their viewpoints and informing the community on a variety of subjects. Here's the host of the show, Reed Powers.
Good morning, everyone. Again, I'm obviously not Reed. I'm Jim Subjack here, substituting for Reed. Reed is on a well-deserved, long-needed vacation. Reed, I expect, will be calling in sometime later this morning from a cruise ship, likely from some sunny clime, somewhere where it's nice out, warm, blue skies, unlike, again, what we have here. This is a live show, of course, but there's tape delay, programs later, but for those of you watching it live, you know it's another long, miserable winter day in a long, miserable winter. For those of you that have to drive today, the main roads are fairly clear. In fact, I think you could say they're mostly clear. The side roads, however, still have a lot of wet snow and slush, the kind of slush that when it grabs your wheel, it kind of takes control. And my advice for you that if that happens, pray heavily. My guest today is David Foley, District Attorney. We're honored to have him here today. We're going to cover a number of topics. Most specifically, we're going to talk about treatment courts. We're going to talk about the philosophy of treatment courts, the creation of them. But before we do that, I want David to tell a little bit about what it is that his office does, how many people he has, what types of matters that they cover, where they cover them, how difficult it is to be running all over the county doing a variety of tasks. A lot of people think DAs just prosecute crimes. That's just the tip of the iceberg. So I'd like to introduce my honored guest. I'm pleased to have him here, David Foley.
Good morning, Jim. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. And I'm sure we can probably cooperatively explain this, having done this job longer than I actually did perform this job. But I am now currently the District Attorney of Chautauqua County. I was elected to the position in 2005. They are 4-year terms. I ran again in 2009, so I'm in the second year of my second term currently. The office, since you've left, we've actually lost some numbers due to budget cuts. We're, I think, now down from a maximum of 7 secretaries. I think we're now down to 4 secretaries, wow. Which is unfortunate. You know what kind of stressors that can put on an office. And of course, you know that an attorney is only as good as his secretary. So we have some pressure there, but we are continuing to open files throughout the county. Not only do we cover felony cases in county court, but we cover all the town courts, both city courts, City of Jamestown and the City of Dunkirk. We're opening now somewhere between 7,000 and 7,500 cases per year, which is even, I think, up a little bit.
I was just going to say, it's unfortunate that you have less support staff to handle a bigger caseload.
Right, because I think when you were there, we were hovering maybe around 6,500 to 6,800 at that time, and since about my second year, we've maintained a constant level of 7,000 or above.
Well, in addition to that, though, don't you also assist police agencies in decisions to make arrests?
Yes, and I think that a lot of individuals, think of us as going into court and trying cases, which is certainly a primary function of our office. Right. But we get involved so early on in police investigations. We help in warrant applications. We help them make decisions regarding whether or not they can speak to someone. For example, if someone's in custody, obviously they need to be read their Miranda warnings. What is custody? What isn't custody? When is it voluntary? When does a person's right to be advised of their right to counsel and to remain silent kick in? These things are things that we deal with on a daily basis. And I know your relationship with law enforcement agencies were very good throughout the county, and I've tried to maintain that relationship and just trying to encourage police to call us and ask us. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, what people don't understand, because of all of that, you're talking about, when you talk a caseload of 700 to 7,500, those are the cases that are actually prosecuted. But in fact, there's contact probably in more than double that amount.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we need to make a decision. We have contact and investigations, make determinations, for example, whether or not we're even going to charge on a crime.
And many people don't get charged as a result of your advice and review.
Well, and I'm sure and our job is not to be prosecutors. Our job is to serve justice.
Right.
And part of our job is to make sure that we have enough evidence to charge someone. And you don't use the position of district attorney as a sword. You don't go out and just do it because you have a personal opinion regarding someone. You need to look at every case in an objective manner and make a determination as to whether or not you have enough to prosecute.
Many times you have cases where you know a certain person did it down in your gut. You know that the evidence, if you could find it, would lead to that person, but that person can't be charged because there's not legally sufficient evidence.
Right, and I'm sure you're aware, and you had to go through it as well. One of the toughest things, being the DA, is explaining to victims or victims' families that although you know in your heart of hearts that the individual committed the act, you don't have enough evidence to go forward. And those are difficult discussions to have, but it's my job as a representative of the people to explain that to individuals.
Now, you don't do this alone. You'd certainly have some help. You don't handle 75 cases by yourself.
No. I don't handle all the thousands of cases. We currently have 10 prosecutors in the office.
Including you or besides you?
Besides me.
Okay.
And 3 are part-time, 7 are full-time, and we divide up the cases depending upon the experience of the prosecutors, the caseload in the local courts, and we just try to make it even across the board. Of course, my higher-end felony prosecutors carry less of a caseload, but the cases that they do manage are more time-intensive.
And more difficult, usually.
And more difficult. You're talking high-end felony type prosecutions.
Although some of the misdemeanor prosecutions can be difficult as well.
Well, there's no question.
That's
I mean, it doesn't, just because the level of crime doesn't make it any easier sometimes. But I certainly have a wonderful staff. I have dedicated attorneys. An awful lot of them were there when you were there, and they carried over into my administration as well.
You have an investigator as well.
Have a new investigator just this year, a retired detective from the Jamestown Police Department named Dan Johnson, retired and came on board with the office. It's beneficial that we're able to get police officers that can retire. He's a few years older than me, but he still wants to work. He can get his retirement, but he can come on board and he can work for us, and we need that experience.
Of course, one of the giants of the office and the first senior investigator for the DA's office just recently passed away, Tony Caprino. And if anybody there knows Tony, they know what a great man he was. And my sympathies go out to his family. And he was a great man, and his legacy will live on in many ways, not just as the DA's office.
Well, I think that, speaking of Tony, I think that an awful lot of the district attorney's office, as the way it is set up and established right now, is due to Tony Caprino.
That's correct.
He was a primary motivating factor in establishing what we now have in Chautauqua County, and was able to build that office up at least to the level that we have it today, which is very good.
Now, we did mention you have an investigator, but I think the public needs to know that you don't go out and independently investigate burglaries, robberies, things like that. You assist them. One investigator certainly could not handle the magnitude of investigations necessary in this county.
That's correct. Most of the cases that come to my office directly, I will refer off to a police agency to conduct the investigation. Occasionally, depending upon what it amounts to.
The nature, the sensitivity of it, correct.
Yeah, there might be something like regarding a municipality, some malfeasance on a municipal level that we'll usually take a look at ourselves, and I'll send my investigator out to handle that. But we typically do not investigate the crimes that's done by the local police agencies, and there's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, we clearly don't have the resources to be able to manage that. But secondly, as you know, a prosecutor should not make himself a witness.
Right.
So we shy away from getting directly involved in the collection of evidence. We will occasionally sit in on some witness interviews, but we make sure that there's a police officer there with us, because we don't want to, if we create ourselves as a witness, then we're not allowed to prosecute.
Right. And your advice in that regard, though, would be if anybody believes they've been the victim of a crime, to contact their local police agency. If they're not really happy with their local police agency, there are 2 agencies with countywide jurisdiction. The state police have actually statewide jurisdiction, and the sheriff's department can prosecute or investigate crimes anywhere within the county. And I assume that's what you'd suggest to people, should they believe they've been a victim.
Absolutely, and we even have people that will show up at my office and will ask if they can charge someone with a crime, and we generally refer them over to the Sheriff's Department or the New York State Police if it's a county-wide situation.
Now, let's presume that somebody's been charged with a crime. It's not as simple as to say, here's an indictment, here's a prosecutor's information, here's a misdemeanor complaint or an information charging a crime. There are more factors than to say, well, this is what he is, we'll go to trial on that. Don't you, in your job and the assistants that work for you, evaluate each case on its own merits?
I think that that's our underlying obligation to the public.
Right.
I've often said this in the past, I'm not a real heavy numbers guy. I'm not really necessarily looking at what has occurred across the board. I think that can give you some general guidelines, but in the end, my ADAs are professionals, they're attorneys, I trust in their judgment. You need to look at every single case, you need to look at the facts of the case, you need to look at the criminal history of the individual that is charged with the crime. You need to meet with witnesses, you need to sort of, before you enter the courtroom to go to trial, determine what should be done with that case. And I have often said in the past, you know, my job isn't to prosecute everybody. My sworn duty is to serve justice. And the longer I do this job, the broader that concept sort of becomes.
It does.
Because you don't, it's not a perfect science. It's taking legal theory and applying it to humanity, and you need someone like yourself, hopefully myself, who can be in the job and understand that and apply discretion to every single case that you have in front of you.
And one of the factors, for example, may be a defendant's age. I know from having children that are now adults and having been a child a long, long time ago myself, that you do things as a child. When I say child, we're talking now about legal responsibility, 16, 17, that age bracket maybe. When you do things as a child that you absolutely wouldn't even think of doing if you were an adult. And that's one of the factors, of course, that you need to take into account. What was the crime? What was its harm? And what would the harm be by trying to, instead of punish the young man or young woman for his or her crime, to try to prevent that crime from occurring again?
I think that's completely accurate. I mean, our job, I think, in the end, even from a societal perspective, is if I can take someone, and again, as I'm sure you're aware, there are crimes out there that are committed that are unforgivable, and people need to be punished.
No matter
Crimes
what
of
age
violence,
they do.
no matter
Right.
what age they do that,
Right.
it's just evidence of sort of a depraved sort of indifference towards
Right.
society. But most of the crimes, and primarily crimes of property and things like that, larcenies and things like that, I think that our first perspective with those, unless it's a repeat sort of a situation, is we need to make the victim whole, and we need to set into place a system that allows us to hopefully get that defendant back into mainstream society, right? Our job isn't to create criminals necessarily. And I'm sure you would agree with this, if I had anyone who came to me 10 years after they went through the system and said, Mr. Foley, I just want to thank you because I'm now employed, I have a wife and kids, and I'm working, and I'm a productive member of society, to me as a prosecutor, that's a success.
It's very rewarding as well. I've had several
is.
of those since I was first DA 17 years ago or longer, 1993, 18 years. So I've had plenty of those come forward, and I don't even know who they are.
Right.
But do you remember me? And it is very rewarding because instead of making that person an unproductive member of society for the rest of his or her life, you've done something to turn them around.